shine on Happy Camper Life. We're loving, living, and learning online on Happy Camper Life.
Hello, I'd like to welcome everybody to My Camp podcast, brought to you by Happy Camper Live, and the special series that we're running called My Camp Lives On, honoring the history and memories of camps that are no longer operating, but were the summer home to thousands of boys and girls and staff, and to help keep alive the memories of those very special places. A very special guest here on this episode. Matthew, please introduce yourself to our audience.
Hey, Matt Mays. I'm here. Yep, I grew up in the camping business. My parents ran a summer camp in Brevard, North Carolina for, close to 25 or 6 years. So, yep, glad to be here. This is pretty cool. Yeah.
Matt,
remember growing up.
Good. Well, I'm going to challenge your memory now, because that's what this is all about, and see how far you can go back. So Matthew's parents owned Camp Deerwood for boys in Brevard, North Carolina. And I'll tell you a quick story about how I got to know Matthew, because we've never really met in person. I was driving back to my camp in Northeast Pennsylvania, had a 6-hour drive, and put on Pandora. And I was listening to Freddie Jones Band radio. And what's so cool about Pandora and Spotify and the way it works is that it's bringing in like music, and all of a sudden a song comes on by a band called Jupiter Coyote, and I'm like, wow, that's a good song. I really like that song. And about 40 minutes later, another song comes on by Jupiter Coyote, and I'm like, all right, now I'm going to go to Jupiter Coyote radio and see what they're all about. So I think to myself, oh, how cool, I just discovered a new band. Of course, a new band that was 25 years old. And then when I started to do some research, I realized that Matthew is the founder and the lead singer of Jupiter Coyote, and his parents happen to own a sleepaway camp as well. So my two favorite things in the world, summer camp and live music. So that's this guy. So Matthew, tell us about Camp Deerwood for boys, the founding of it, and your earliest memories growing up there.
Wow, this is going to take a minute. Okay, my dad. We moved from Texas when I was 3 years old. My dad left General Motors and bought Camp Deerwood, which had basically been run into the ground. The previous owner had closed the camp. Look, there's a whole story behind this history that I'm not going to bore you with. It's just unbelievable. You wouldn't believe it if I told it to you. But anyway, the place had been closed. I guess my dad was looking for a place to send my brother and I to camp when we got a little older. So somehow he landed on this place called Camp Deerwood in Brevard, North Carolina. And it turns out, that we looked into it, and it had been closed for years. The previous owner kind of ran into some personal trouble, and they closed it for a while. So somehow, I was 3 years old. I don't know how all this happened, but somehow my dad was fed up with General Motors and wanted to get out of the corporate, America, and go do his own thing. He was my dad was an All-American college basketball player and kind of an industrial art wizard, and really kind of one of those Mother Earth News hippie industrial guys who could build anything and do anything himself. And I think he wanted to go do his own thing. So at 28 years old, as he says, he took a 3,000% pay cut, bought this rundown camp in North Carolina that had been closed for years, and went up there and got in a kind of a partnership with the previous owner. And a year later, my mother and my brother and I moved up. I was 3. We moved from Arlington, Texas. I don't remember any of Texas. My first memories are Western North Carolina. So my dad goes up a year early. We follow a year later. It was kind of my mom was asking questions on the phone. I'm just kind of putting all this together because I was too young to remember it. But my dad said, look, the place needs a lot of work, but the boys are going to love it. So he just kind of wanted to go do his own thing, and the entrepreneurial spirit, and a guy who was, talented enough to be able to go do that. So the place needed a lot of work. We moved up there. He bought it in 1966. He bought the other owner out in 67. We moved up in 67.
He inherited a total of zero campers and zero staff, right?
Oh, it when I say it had been run into the ground, I think the guy had run it for 1 year, maybe as a boys camp before he got there. It was hurting. Now you got to realize this camp goes all the way back to 1923. It was built in 23. It was a YMCA camp. The first three owners were pretty quick. Then it turned into Camp Chickasaw for girls. And then Mr. Sprott came in, the guy that my dad bought it from in 66, and ran it as a girls camp up to about 1955. Now, look, I'm not going to bore you guys with all the gory details about what happened with that. You can probably go on the internet and find out.
Well, that's
Anyway,
okay. We're talking about Deerwood for boys now. That's what we want.
well, it was a girls camp till 55, and then there was a big scandal.
Got it.
Previous owner. So it closed for years. When it reopened, it was suddenly magically Camp Deerwood for boys. I'm going to let you guys go figure all that out. Anyway, my dad didn't know about all this stuff. So he comes into this, and we bought the other guy out, continued the boys camp. He built it up into an incredible program, ran it for 26 years. You know, my dad was, like I said, was an All-American basketball player, a coach, just a motivator of young men. I think it was truly his calling. You know, 15,000 kids came through there. And, you know, I'll say one thing about my dad, you know, and I'm going through this now as he's kind of on the downhill slide, and he's not remembering much at 85. But you either loved that guy or you didn't. I mean, you knew right where you stood with a man like Bill Mays. He was a half-breed Comanche Indian from West Texas. And you didn't you know, if you wanted a pat on the back, you were looking in the wrong place. It was kind of a rough and tumble boys camp, but he really gave a lot of guidance and structure, excuse me, to a lot of kids and a lot of counselors too that came through there. So I think that was his calling. You know, he did it for 26 years. Like I said, you know, we moved up there when I was 3. My first memories are wandering around that place when I was probably 3 or 4 years old. My first memory is my mom worked in the craft shop. My mom was a potter and a painter and an acrylic paint and oil painter and watercolor painter, and she could do anything artistic. So my dad kind of drafted her to run the craft shop. So she learned how to throw pots and ran the pottery wheels in the craft shop. So after camp was over one summer when I was probably 3 or 4 years old, the first year we were there, we had gone down to my mom's craft shop and do something. She took me with it. I wandered away from her and got into the old basketball gym right next to the craft shop. And I remember sitting there, and this was a building that was built in 1923. It looked exactly like the, if you ever saw the movie Dirty Dancing, it looked like the pavilion that was filmed in Dirty Dancing. Matter of fact, that is in Lake Lure, North Carolina. I think the same company was contracted out to build both of those gymnasiums. We tore it down in the early 70s, but my first memory was wandering over there and sitting on the front porch steps of that basketball gym and watching the carpenter bees chew holes in the wood. And what was fascinating back in these days, after summer camp was over, my dad would run a week of football camps where we had high school football teams come in from all over the Southeast and practice on our facility, because we had plenty of cabins and a dining hall and tons of athletic fields. Like we had 5 football fields out there. Wow. So that particular high school that was in that gym that I'm talking about was Blaytonboro High School out of South Carolina. And I can remember all the bunk beds that we'd stacked in there and the old, you know, 1960s oscillating fans turning from the heat, and watching the football players out there on the practice field in the heat of August in Western North Carolina up in the mountains. As I got older, I had so many memories about that, because this was in the time of the Vietnam War. You know, a lot of those kids were probably drafted and sent off to fight and probably never came home. I think there were 5 or 6 different high school football teams in there in that 1 week that we did it. That's my first memory of that place. And then, of course, I grew up there. Right. You know, I said my dad sold the place 2 years ago.
Right. And we'll talk about that later, but yeah. Tell me, you know, so how many boys was he running sessions? How long were the sessions, and how many kids were there at a time?
Well, it changed. Now, when we first started off, it was a 3 and a 6 week, kind of around the school schedules, a 3 week session, then a 6 week, a longer one. Then it kind of moved to 2 4s, and then it kind of moved to 2 4s and a 2 later, or even shorter, a 3, 4, and a 2. It kind of was, worked around the school schedule for the kids. And our kids were coming from all over, everywhere, mostly the Southeast, some from the Northeast, and some, international kids, Caracas, Venezuela, Mexico City, Puerto Rico, some other places that we got some kids from other places. But the sessions were kind of dictated by when the starting time to go back to school was.
Right.
But that's kind of, it was a 3 and a 6, a 4 and a 4. And that's kind of how it ended up to my dad.
So, you said something about your dad being like either loved him or, the opposite, but the thing about him and the way that he affected kids' lives. So I've always said, and the reason why I got into camping personally was because I thought my camp director, and I went to an all boys camp in Maine, was the second most influential male figure in my life growing up. So my guess, Matthew, is Bill Mays was that to many boys.
He was. And you got to also realize a lot of things were changing, from when he bought it in the late 60s and through the 70s, all the way through the 80s. Families were changing, workplace was changing, divorce rate was through the roof. These parents would drop some of these kids off to my dad and expect him to work some miracle on them. It was a structured, disciplined place. So you were either going to get it or you weren't. But it was, yeah, I think he was. I think he became a father figure to a lot of those families, and especially the ones of those in the 70s when the divorce rate just really was starting to skyrocket. Were young boys, and this was an all boys camp. This was not a co-ed camp. It was a boys camp.
Yep.
A rough and tumble boys camp. And I think so, you couldn't even run a camp like that now today. I'll throw that in there. There was no way you can find someone to ensure the program we were doing, but when we were kids, I'm 58 years old. So when I was a kid, that's what we did. That was the kind of activities that lit us up. And it was incredibly fun. But you'd be hard pressed to do it today, which is part of the reason my dad got out of it. But to answer your question, yes, he was probably a father figure and a strong male presence to a lot of those kids. And even the ones that didn't like him. And then I could say, you might not have liked him or you loved him, but you won't forget him.
Was the program equally distributed with the sports and the arts, or was it more of a sports camp? What was the program kind of like?
It was more of the sports. And then we had a mandatory physical fitness and coordination class that you had to take with your morning classes 5 days a week. My dad started that because he just thought it was that necessary to young boys to be physically fit. And as he started in school, started watching the Presidential Council of Fitness scores drop and drop and drop and drop every year, he kind of tuned into it even more. Look, we had some parents sending their kids to this camp for no other reason than that, right, because it was that important. But there was an art side of it too that we had, with the craft shop that my mom ran. But on top of that, man, you also had riflery, ski, archery, in an unbelievable nature program. Now, we had about 200 acres there on that place, and my dad was an animal freak. It was a farm in the off season. We had every kind of animal you could think about: chickens, turkeys, goats, sheep, cows. I mean, everything, and we kind of took care of them in the off season. So there was also this kind of, bio-friendly educational nature program going on at the farm program at the same time all this was going on. And every kid had to be tapped into that for an all-night capture the flag. You didn't have to take that class, but it was very educational. All the tree species and all the animals and fish traps. And I was an all-American high school basketball player and played in college. And I turned out a pro career in Europe to do the music thing. But I ran that nature program one year rather than coach basketball for my dad up there. And it was the most fun I ever had because I could not believe how those kids knew absolutely nothing about so much of the stuff that's just right there at their fingertips in their backyard. And I would, you know, I'd take them on these trips and I'd teach them about the trees and the bark and reading that, moss on the north side, and show them how to run a fish trap or even build one and why it works. Snakes, hey, which ones are poisonous, which ones are not? Hey, there's a couple quick ways to learn if you want to get close enough to one. You know, just everything. Poison ivy, we got 3 different kinds. I mean, just all this stuff that is so valuable for these. I got more out of that teaching these kids than I did how to do a crossover, a backstep, or a jump shot, or all that. You know, that was kind of a small group of boys that were really focused on sports like that. Some of them get the level I was, you know, they really want to train like that. That was only a small percentage of the kids. More of them got stuff out of all the other stuff we did at that camp. So I'm gonna say it wasn't just a sports camp. It had all of that captured the flag.
So what was the waterfront? Did you have you had a private lake? Were you on a private lake
Oh
there?
gosh, yeah, we had private lake. We had 4 of them.
Oh, okay.
There was a swimming lake right in the backyard of our house, which was probably about an acre and a half, and that had everything in the world. We taught swimming lessons. We had a WSI up there for people that kids that want to learn life saving and stuff like that. But it also had a zip line, one of the first ones I've ever seen, and my dad came up with it. And this was a zip line you could fall off of into the lake. If you fell, that was it, dude. You're going to lay a Tarzan rope, 2 ropes, a roller coaster. I'm just going to leave that at the roller coaster, but it was a flat roller coaster thing he came up with. And my brother, I remember watching my brother test this thing out one spring. I'm like, somebody's going to die on this. And it would go down this track and shoot you off in the lake at about 45 miles an hour. I'm telling you, my dad was, he was a very creative person. I think that's where I got all my music and stuff and art from my mom. But, my dad can't play or sing or carry a tune in a bucket, but man, he could just come up with the stuff. And then he had enough, in like I said, mechanical sense to build it, and actually do it. He could do it himself. He didn't have to subcontract this out. He could build and do anything. He built everything on that place. If you want to see it, just go to, deerwood.com and look at it. There's new owners called Deerwood Reserve. It's a lodge and cabin place now. My dad closed the summer camp in 91. And then we kind of opened up a lodge and cabin business for, people just to come stay. And then we did that all the way up to a couple of years ago when he got out of it, we sold it. And I thought about going back and doing it, but I couldn't tour and be on the road and do all the stuff with Jupiter Coyote, which is a whole nother 30-year career.
Right. So let's talk about like that for a minute. I would love, you got your guitar in your hand, and I know a lot of the Jupiter Coyote stuff, but how about something a song that either you wrote or was a Deerwood song that you can play for us now?
Oh gosh, man, I got to get back to this. Is kind of interesting, me getting into music. I remember my dad. I started playing banjo in 2nd grade, and I remember my dad coming in my room one night, and he tacked a $5 bill up over the doorway for me and my brother. He said, "Anybody who learns to play the guitar gets this $5 bill." We were pretty young, but what he wanted us to be able to play in Vespers and morning church, and for the Sunday night campfires. I mean, any kid that came to camp that could play guitar, that was a big deal. So I started performing at the Deerwood Sunday night campfires when I was probably in 2nd or 3rd grade. I think that's where all this got started. I got used to doing that at a very young age. I wasn't freaked out by it. Started writing songs in junior high, but it kind of all comes back to this camp. It's not a large leap to see how I ended up here when you see what I came up through. And I can think about these songs. So many of the songs that I have written in Jupiter Coyote are about Deerwood, or about that place. And on Sunday nights, every cabin had to get up and perform a live act at the campfire. Counselors had to come up with some song or some skit or something for them to perform. That went all the way up through 12, 13 cabins. So it was kind of like the Gong Show every Sunday night. Some stuff was really good when you had counselors that really could bring and harness some incredible talent out of what they were doing. And it was mostly taking, contemporary songs at the time and add new lyrics to them that kind of would reflect camp or whatever. And then some of them were more traditional, pieces that we did at camp that we carried on. And counselors would get up like, the Smoky Mountain Boys would get up and do Butter Beans. Right. And it was just absolutely awful. You had 5 counselors that couldn't sing. But just a bowl of butter beans, pass cornbread if you please, songs like that, and it was terrible. So that's kind of where it all got started, and then I started playing, and I would start putting more original stuff in it as we moved along, where it wasn't just some parody of a contemporary song or a church song or something that we did, like I said, in church service or whatever.
So will you
And
do
every now and
one?
then you'd have other kids that came in and played. And
Right.
man, that's when it really got good. I remember when I was in cabin 13, I didn't pick up guitar till I was probably in junior high. I was a banjo player. But we had a guy from Louisiana, from Lafayette, Louisiana, named Charles Steck, that was in there in the basketball program, who was a really good drummer. So we were jamming one day in the cabin, and Steck had turned up a couple of 5-gallon buckets and was playing the drums on them, like one of these,
The street
street
musicians.
performers you would see in New York.
Sure.
So man, it was so badass that we said we got trash cans, and we had 2 or 3 different size trash cans. We had some type of stand with a tennis ball can on it for a hi-hat, and we basically rigged Steck up a trap kit. And man, we did Smoke on the Water at campfire one night with Steck playing the trash can drums, and that place went crazy. It was just nuts. I think that's when I really got bit by the rock and roll bug. I saw how that kind of energy could come off of what you were doing, and people just latch right into it.
Right.
So when I got done playing basketball in college, I moved straight to Georgia. I'd already been playing on the road and never looked back. So what wasn't really, they'd offered me more money in Europe to go play pro basketball, I would have. That was 1988. We just didn't get paid as much money back in those days as you do now.
Right.
Although I was pretty good player. So
Can you do it? You want to do a song for us now that has some sort of that would if when the Deerwood people watch this podcast, bring a smile to their face.
this tune is called Shorty. And I gotta back up. Shorty, when my dad bought Camp Deerwood, was the old black caretaker maintenance man that came along with the property. And my dad kept him on for about 5 or 6 years when we first bought it. Shorty was a hard-working dude, man. I think my dad probably would have had a harder time figuring out where everything was. I mean, you got to realize you had septic fields and 2 different, water systems that were on pump. We weren't on city sewer. I mean, there's just a lot of stuff to figure out how it worked. And I don't think my dad would have been able to figure it all out without having Shorty there. So this song is really about Shorty. It's about my dad and my grandfather, who my dad brought up from West Texas to run the farm program when we bought this place. And Sugarloaf Mountain is the mountain that sits at Deerwood. So it's a magical place. The property all faces south, and it goes to the top of one of these candy-kissed mountains in the French Broad River Basin, where the French Broad River is meandering all through this valley at probably 2,400 feet. And then there's just one candy-kissed mountain sitting right in the middle of that river valley. And Camp Deerwood and our property was on the whole top of that mountain on the backside down through the river valley facing south, which was where you want to be in the wintertime. You don't want to be on the north side, man. It's frozen and cold. So when I mentioned Sugarloaf in this song, that's the mountain that's set right behind the property. The whole property set on it. It's nestled right at the foothills of it. Yeah. Shorty was no caretaker. He lived down on the knoll. Always had a pen and a peach snuff in his overalls. Shorty didn't like talking and he never went to town. So if you work with me, you can tell your stories, but your shovel don't slow down, boy. Jack was a half West Texas. He lived through 2 world wars, a dust bowl, and a Great Depression. He was early to rise and early to bed. Said success was food on the table and a roof over your head, boy. All these memories rolling down Sugarloaf like a mountain waterfall pouring on my mind. It's more than folklore up on Sugarloaf. Feels just like a place the world left behind. And I can't say when the Beltway sold out the self-made man, an American made. But I can say I'm almost certain our forefathers are still in his graves. Got a father who works like a mule, little set in his ways. In his world there's only 2 colors, neither one is gray. For all 50 years has been a steward of his land. Some hard work ain't some kind of curse, but God's greatest gift to man, boy. And all these memories rolling down Sugarloaf like a mountain waterfall pouring on my mind. It's more than folklore up on Sugarloaf. Feels just like the place the world left behind. And all these memories rolling down Sugarloaf like a mountain waterfall pouring on my mind. And all my heroes are up on Sugarloaf. Feels just like a place the world left behind. Left behind. Left behind. Left behind. Something like that.
That was awesome. And so let me ask, so the memories come flooding back when you sing that song. They have to.
Oh gosh,
how old were you when you wrote that song?
man, I probably wrote that 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
longer than that. I can't remember.
Yeah.
I think I wrote it when I was really coming to grips with the fact that my dad may sell that place, because I wasn't really on board with him doing that. So we put the whole place into the Carolina Mountain Land Conservancy, which is a conservation of open space to protect it. It was moving like 99-year lease blocks. So the new owners were cool with that when they took it over. We wanted, it's a magical place, a wildlife habitat. It's just incredible.
Well, the cool thing about it is, one of the camps, the reason why I'm doing this series is because the first camp I went to in 1971, 2, 3, and 4 was an all boys camp in an all boys camp in North Belgrade, Maine, and now it's condos and there's nothing there except the dining room. And I think what's so cool, Matthew, about your dad's property, because I was there to see your show in the fall is that it's got the feeling like you drive in and you know it was a camp.
Oh yeah, and I gotta hand it to Scott and Deion Hodgson, the new owners. They are totally on board. You know what? My dad turned down 12 buyers before he sold it to Scott, and I know why he did sell it to Scott. Scott reminds me a lot of my dad, and man, that couldn't have landed in the better hands.
So you go there now, right? And it's
heck yeah, we're all like family.
Yeah, it's a preserve, and just so our audience knows what's going on here is that Matthew and Jupiter Coyote do 2 weekends there, one in the spring and one in the fall. I went to the concert in the fall, and it feels like you're at camp, and you've got that lodge, and you go in there with the animal heads and the old chandelier and stuff. It just emanates what it was, even though it doesn't exist as a boys' camp anymore. You know, you can feel that it meant a lot.
Oh, absolutely. I think people still get it every time they come there. And Scott's carried on a lot of those traditions from my dad in Deerwood and tapped into the environmental side of it and the conservation side of it. Like, man, he is a great guy. He's like a brother to me. You know, and I really wasn't on board with the whole all this, but man, when I met Scott and Deion, I'm like, gosh, okay, Dad, I know why you sold it to this guy. You picked the right guy. And
what did they do with the house at the top of the hill?
Well, the one at the top of the hill, my mom is still in. My dad, unfortunately, is in a nursing home now.
Right.
And I don't think my mom's going to stay there a whole lot longer.
But that's pretty special that it's still pretty cool that she's there, I think.
She is. We had a life estate deal on the property where Scott and said my parents could live there until they were dead if they wanted to, which was, a good idea because, Scott's learned all that stuff from my dad. He can't remember now. So he calls me every now and then and say, hey, where was this or where was this? I'm like, because I'm the only other one that knows it all. But he's figured it out. He's done a great job. They're great people. They've tapped into a lot of the stuff that my dad was already doing that, is from a sustainable conservation, reusable, recyclable, rustic woods. I mean, Scott's just a master at building and using all these recyclable woods and stuff that we had. He's put all those cabinets and stuff there that had the kids' names and the toothpaste from all the way back to the 40s, back in girls' camp. He's put all that stuff back in some of these cabins. I mean, it's really cool what he's doing. Okay. And he's made it nicer and he's made it better. And, it needed a little update, but he's, that guy's, like I said, he reminds me a lot of my dad. He's real handy. He can build, and he's an industrial art wizard. And he likes doing that kind of stuff. He's kind of hands-on. So he and his brother both are in there doing it. And they're just, besides myself, they're the ones to take it on and do it. I couldn't be more thrilled about it. Love them to death. I mean, it's great. Like I said, they're like brothers to me. That it's like one big giant family now with the Hodgsons and the Mays, all of us.
Very nice. Let's go back before we're going to wrap up in a few minutes. Now I need you to get into just for a few minutes some funny pranks that you can share with the audience of something that a memory of yours that either you were involved with a prank or somebody else is involved with a prank, that anyone who was at Deerwood while you were there would be like, that was one.
Oh my gosh. Look, I could give you 10.
Okay.
I've narrowed it down already to the 2 most incredible ones. Now, first of all, you wouldn't be able to do this now with cell phones and laptops and all this interconnectivity where people have instant whatever. You used to have to write a letter, stick a stamp on it, get it back to your mom and dad, before the phone blew up in the camp office. Okay, so my dad had this insane idea one summer to have an escaped convict. All right, so what it was, he and the food salesman from IFH, a guy named John Washburn, concocted this whole story to have this escaped convict run through camp. And then Washburn was going to come out, shoot the guy in the field, throw him in the back of the car and haul butt from him. Okay, so here we go. So at lunchtime, the camp director makes the announcement to all the kids. All right, the sheriff's department has called us, and it's come to our attention that there's a convict that has escaped from the Transylvania County Correctional Facility, and was last seen heading over Sugarloaf Mountain. So after lunch, the kids have to go to rest period. We're all in their cabin. So here it goes. Washburn comes flying into camp where all the kids are in their cabins with the siren on top of his car blaring, peels it around in the big gym parking lot, gravel flying everywhere. Dad comes down, JC's come down, they have a talk, and then they pulls down into the, like right in front of the big gym. And then one of the junior counselors was dressed up with a mask like the convict. He comes running down the hill from the cabin 13 out into the field, into the open field. So at this time, the word has just traveled all up and down. All the kids are out on the cabin line watching this. So the guy runs out into the field. Washburn gets in his car, chases the guy out in the field, slams on the brakes, opens the car, fires a couple 3.57 blanks at the guy, falls in the field. They think they shot him. He goes down there, picks him up, throws him in the back of the car, and hauls us out of camp with the dude in the back of the car. Kids are going absolutely bonkers, nuts, crazy. You couldn't believe they just shot the convict in the middle of the shinny field while during rest period. So no one said anything. So all the, as you can imagine, the kids the next day were all writing letters home. My mom said, who was also in the office when she wasn't doing the craft shop, about 4 or 5 days after those letters hit home, that phone was ringing off the hook. What is going on up there, man? Half of the moms and dads were ready to come get their kids. Some sheriff shot a convict in the middle of one of the playing fields and threw him in the back of the car and took off. Well, anyway, we had to come clean that it was all a big prank and a hoax. But it was absolutely nuts. I mean, some of those kids they just couldn't believe that actually happened. So I remember all the guys that did it. Alan Sanford from Montgomery, Alabama was the guy who played the convict. Washburn was the guy who did the sheriff, and he was our IFH food salesman. Came sell all the food.
And the fact, how about the fact that your dad was in on the prank? I mean, that's insane.
Oh, yeah, he was in on it. I mean, he and Washburn came up with the whole idea.
That's wild.
You couldn't do something like that now.
No, you definitely.
Oh my gosh, you'd be sued for some type of traumatic, whatever, emotional distress.
Yeah.
Give me a break, man.
Yeah.
You know, I think all that kind of nonsense is part of what drove my dad out of it, a hardcore West Texan. And
Right.
he's just like, you know what? I'm not going to be bullied around by the whole, and if we thought it was bad then, it's 1,000 times worse now. I mean,
Right.
you couldn't even, come on, man. I don't even want to get into this. I'm not going to.
No, we're not going to get political.
But I'm not really on board with a whole lot of that.
Well, one of the things, Matthew, that I think is really cool, and I did some research before we did this earlier in the week, is that there's a really great website that the alumni started. I think it's campdeerwood.org, which we will post. What we will post, and we're going to put some pictures together for that are on this podcast, and people can see, because there's such a tradition and there's such a history there, and that's why we're doing this. And I hope that you enjoyed sort of. I saw a light in your eye, and I saw big smiles as we were talking in the last hour.
Yeah, well, I was real proud of my dad for what he did. I had to share my father with about 150 other kids every summer, but it was okay. It was like having a bunch of buddies over every summer, and he was hard on me and my brother. I mean, he's one of those dads, you didn't get any preferential treatment. Matter of fact, you were the example, toe the line. That's how that was going to be, in front of all those other kids. But he was so much fun. He was, it was just an absolute, it was an incredible way to grow up as a kid, and even my basketball career and stuff in the off season. My dad was a great player, and we spent all those off seasons in the gym. And, I wouldn't have been near the player I was without his one-on-one attention to help propel me to those levels. And it was just kind of a magical way to, to grow up. And then there was a lot of hard lessons and tough stuff in there too. It wasn't all a cakewalk. But I will say this, it was a hell of a lot more fun than it was anything.
Right. Exactly.
It was. I feel sorry for kids today who can't go and really experience the place the way we did when we were kids.
Right.
Because there were no knee pads and bike helmets. I mean, we were running bicycles off a ramp into the lake, at 30 miles an hour, bike and everything. I mean, it was just a different world, and kids would probably, especially boys, would probably still really, really enjoy this stuff. They just don't get a chance to do it anymore.
Not the same way. Certainly not the same way. It just sounds like your dad was a camp director. It's what he was.
Well, he was the director, he was the owner, he was the boss, he was the head. You know, he wasn't one of those owners who wasn't like, he ruled with an iron fist.
Right.
But he made it fun too, man. A lot of rules, but if you did suck by the rules, you're gonna have a lot of fun.
So now I'm going to put you on the spot, and I don't know whether this is, if we can do this or not, you have to tell me because you have your guitar. So to me, camp is the real thing.
Well, it is. I wrote that song actually in Boone, North Carolina back in like 1993.
Want to play it?
Yeah, I got retuned for it, but you know, we came from I remember we played in Huntsville, Alabama the night before. And we had an all-night drive up to Boone, and we were playing at a place up there in Boone called Solicitos Italian Pizzeria. And what it was an Italian restaurant on one side. And then at night when the restaurant closed, they had a rock bar on the other side of it. And all the Appalachian State kids would just pile in that place and listen to music bands and drink beer after the restaurant closed. So one day we got there early for load in, and we couldn't get in the place yet. So Catfish, our sound man, and I were sitting there on the sidewalk, and there's a whole nother part of the story I'm going to leave out because we just don't need to tell it. But pulled out a guitar, actually this exact guitar. I've had this 33 years. This was the exact guitar that I wrote it. So we're sitting there, and I started playing this song to Catfish. And it was kind of nonsense at first. I think I was just trying to make him laugh. So anyway, we're sitting there. I had just been to see the Allman Brothers play at Chastain Park in Atlanta, Georgia. It was the first time I'd ever seen the Allman Brothers play, and it was right when Warren Haynes had first joined the band. And man, they were on fire. So there are kind of three parts to this song. Boone, Atlanta for the Allman Brothers, and then Hilton Head, South Carolina, where we were going after we played in Boone. We were heading down to Hilton Head to play at a place called the Old Post Office. And when I mentioned the part about sitting at the bar mixing black and tans, every night when we got done playing at the Old Post Office, the bartender, a guy named Bubby, throw everybody out of the bar, the band we were loading out, and the rest, we'd all sit up at the bar, and he'd make us a couple black and tans, the good ones with Harp on draft and Guinness.
Right.
We'd sit there and drink black and tans. So this whole song is real.
This whole song is real. And to sort of sing us out on this podcast, here's Matthew B. Mays from Jupiter Coyote. Camp is the real thing, and this song is called The Real Thing.
Sitting on the sidewalk in Moon, ain't got nothing better to do. Mr. S sing a song too, that's amore. I roll around here a time or two, probably in downtown before we're through. You got coke, you got the real thing. Chastain, Atlanta, GA. I went to see the Allman Brothers play. I didn't leave quite the same way, 'cause I was smoking in a blaze of glory. Well, they rolled up at number 10 and sent them away. I sure did love to hear the brothers play. And you hear that, you hear the real thing. I guess out and drunk is all I am, 'cause I've been sitting at the bar mixing black and tans. Can't say nothing for the shape I'm in. I ain't drunk, I'm just drinking. You can ride so high on a plane load of fools, and one day, son, you'll run out of fuel. You hear that, son, that's the real thing. If you can ride so high, run a plane load of fools, and one day, son, you run out of fuel. When you hit ground, son, that's the real thing, yeah. There you go.
Thanks, my friend. I really appreciate you doing this. Anything else you want to add before we sign off?
Man, we could tell stories all night. I barely scratched the surface of that place. Like I said, my dad ran it for 26 years. It was every year there was just some kind of story you wouldn't believe. I mean, yeah, maybe we'll have to do it again for round 2.
Well, certainly you and I are going to do it because I will see you at Deerwood either in the spring or the fall, and we'll sit down, and I'd love to hear some more stories from you. So thank you for Matthew B. Mays from Camp Deerwood for Boys in Brevard, North Carolina, and Jupiter Coyote. Thank you for joining us. Please watch some of our other podcasts, which can be found on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple, and anywhere else that you like to watch your podcasts. Have a great day.
Take a moment to shine on Happy Camper Life.